What's up, everyone? In this video, as you've probably deduced by now, I'm going to be looking at the least and most difficult signs to have Mars in. So this is mostly applying to what are the hardest natal Mars placements that one would be born with, but you could also maybe to a lesser extent apply this to transits as well. So what are the hardest and easiest Mars transits to experience as well? And let's see here. If you are interested in this, I have done this type of video with Sun, Moon, Mercury, and Venus already as of this date. So I will link my hardest placements playlist above somewhere. But yeah, let's get into it here. So what is Mars basically? Let's just super quickly go through that and then we'll go through each of the signs here. So Mars in the chart represents our individuality, our drive, our ambition. It also applies a lot to sexuality as well. How do we express sexuality and ambition? How do we experience those things? Mars also represents how we respond to crisis situations. So an easy sign to have Mars in is going to be, well, I don't want to give it away, so I'm not going to really explain that yet, but let's just get into it here. So to really mix things up, this is going to be a little bit cringy, but to mix things up, I'm going to go through the signs in alphabetical order. So let's start with Aquarius. So at first glance, especially if you're using a modern interpretation of the sign of Aquarius, this may seem like a really strong, easy sign to have Mars in. Aquarius is provocative, rebellious, individualistic. And so one might think having Mars there would be really strong. This is going to be a rebel. This is going to be a person who's not afraid to stand out. And although those things can be true, kind of, I would say they mostly are not true. Aquarius is the sign of the group. Yes, it is the sign of individuality, but it is a double-sided sign. All the air signs are kind of double-sided, in my opinion. They represent two opposing themes, two opposing poles of the same theme. So for Aquarius, it does represent individuality, but it also represents the group, maybe even more so. It represents community. So a person who has Mars in Aquarius is going to only, or I should say mostly, fight for the group, for tradition. What is the group consensus? So someone with Mars in Aquarius is going to really care about what other people think, and they're going to only want to fight for what does my community believe in. So this could be a really excellent soldier if they are fighting for their tribe, their family, their community. That can definitely be a strong side to this sign. But when it comes for sticking up for themselves, fighting for themselves, asserting their own opinion, asserting their individuality, which again, that's all of, that's mostly what Mars is there for in your chart. This is going to be real rough, not going to lie. So all of you Mars and Aquarius people, this is a difficult placement. It's not the hardest, I would say, because, I just covered some areas that are innately strong here, mostly in fighting for tradition and community. But again, when it comes to everything having to do with individuality, Aquarius is an air sign. They're not, they're more focused on other people than they are themselves. So you'll see air signs in general are kind of rough for Mars, generally speaking. Next is Aries. So if you are astrologically astute, you will know that Mars is in domicile in Aries. Mars rules Aries. Aries is the first sign. Aries is all about individuality, very different from Aquarius. Aries is probably the best sign for, speaking off the cuff, initiating, taking that plunge, being ambitious, being driven, being sexual. Aries comes across as cool. You know what I mean? I don't know how to better explain that, but it's kind of a sexy sign, so to speak, like objectively. Although on the other hand, they can come across maybe a little bit very blunt or undiplomatic, kind of a little rough, if that makes sense. But all of this is exactly in line with Mars. That's why Mars is in domicile in Aries. So it's probably pretty obvious at this point. I'm going to put Aries in the too easy category. The only challenge I could see here is having too much Mars energy. Mars is a malefic, meaning that it is a challenging energy in itself. Mars, if you look to Greek mythology, for example, Mars or Aries is kind of a dick, kind of a troublemaker. So having Mars and Aries in your birth chart, you may have too much Mars energy. You may not know how to choose your battles. You may, go into full fight mode over something that could be described as relatively trivial. So that's the only challenge I could see, maybe being too riled up, too intense, too energetic. But other than that, having that really strong Mars energy at your disposal will really come in handy for being ambitious, asserting yourself, etc., etc. Next is Cancer. So this is definitely shifting gears. Again, if you're astrologically astute, you'll know that Mars is in fall in Cancer. And generally speaking, when a planet is in fall, that is the most difficult sign to have Mars in. So I'm not going to draw it out. I'm going to put Cancer in the hardest category. But why is that? So Cancer represents home and family. And like we just talked about, Mars is what you fight for and how you fight. So having that fighting energy in the sign that represents home and family, this means that people who have Mars in Cancer are going to fight for their family, so definitely very admirable, but they're also going to fight with their family as well. So it's that kind of energy of like, no one bullies my family but me type of thing. Or I shouldn't say bullies because that's kind of judgmental, but no one fights with my family but me type of energy. Does that make sense? So there is some kind of strength there, but also it's very dysfunctional. Also, let's not forget, Cancer is probably the most emotional sign. And again, Mars is how we fight. So if you fight in a way that's very emotional, that will be difficult. It will be dysfunctional. And I should say with this placement, as well as any placement, just because it's hard doesn't mean it's always going to be hard. This just means that someone born with Mars and Cancer may have to work on this. There is definitely room for self-improvement. You still have free will. You can utilize strengths here and then grow with the weaknesses or grow with the challenges, rise up to the challenges and evolve. Basically, there's just going to be more work to do with a placement like Mars in Cancer than there will be with Mars in Aries, generally speaking. In other words, having a challenging placement, there's it's something that can be worked on if one desires that. Next is Capricorn. So Capricorn is exactly opposite Cancer. Whenever you have whenever you have a planet in a sign exactly opposite of its fall, that would be its exaltation. In other words, a planet's exalted sign is always opposite its fall sign. In other words, again, having a planet opposite its generally most challenging sign, which would be its fall sign, in this case Cancer, opposite that would be its generally strongest sign. So basically, to put it really simply, Mars is exalted in Capricorn. I think for pretty much all the planets, when they are exalted, I would personally put them in the too easy category. So why is that? Okay, this is probably an even stronger placement than Mars in Aries. We talked about how, with Mars in Aries, there was that really strong, ambitious energy, fiery energy, but maybe too strong, too out of control at times. With Mars in Capricorn, you still have that really strong assertiveness, the strong individuality, but we also have foresight, which Aries can lack. Mars in Capricorn is the military general. It's the person that knows how to fight in the moment, but they also know how to plan ahead. So this is probably the easiest, most innately strong Mars sign that you could possibly have. This person has the best of both worlds. They have the instant reflexes and the ability to act in the moment, but they also know how to apply all that in a much more long-term scope as well. Okay, let me kind of get situated here. Next would be Gemini. So Gemini is obviously a very different sign from Capricorn. Gemini is much more in the moment. It's much more fickle. It's mutable air. So Gemini wants to try everything. It wants to do this. It wants to do that. It's constantly changing. So having Mars there is going to be a little bit confusing. You're not going to know exactly what you want. And that Mars is all about desire and passion. what do you want? How are you going to get what you want? So if Mars is in Gemini, you're not always going to know exactly what you want or how to get it. Or even if you do know what you want, it may change somewhat rapidly or constantly. So you can already see that this is a bit dysfunctional for sure. I'm still going to put Mars and Gemini in the neutral category though, just because there is kind of a quickness with Gemini. Gemini is very quick to adapt. So having Mars in Gemini makes you very adaptable. And there are some other kind of benefits of Mars and Gemini as well. Mars and Gemini, probably more than any other placement, I think results in a quick-wittedness. These people are excellent with debating, speaking, camouflaging. They can be very clever, very kind of quick on their feet. So that's why I put this in the neutral category. There are a lot of strengths here, but there's also definitely a lot of challenges when it comes to, again, knowing what you want or how to get it. Gemini is also very detached, so having Mars in any sign that's detached is going to be difficult because, again, you're not going to have those instant reflexes. When you put Mars in more emotional signs, that's where you get that really, it's not even quick thinking, it's faster than thinking. It's impulses, it's reflexes, it's instincts. Does that make sense? And Mars having to do with much of our instincts, it's going to thrive in more instinctual signs like Aries or Capricorn, for example. Much more so than more mentally oriented signs or detached signs like Gemini and Aquarius. Next is Leo. Now, Mars is not in domicile in Leo, it's not exalted, but Mars does tend to do well in fire signs. Mars is kind of a fiery energy. It literally looks fiery. If you look at it in the sky, it looks angry. It's like this orange, it's got this orange glow to it. So when you put Mars in a fire sign, especially a fixed fire sign that is Leo, that means that your ambition, your sexuality, your drive, it's all going to be not only very strong since this is a fire energy, but it's also going to be very stable with Leo. So in other words, having Mars in Leo makes you the type of fighter that will fight every day. There's an endurance to it. You'll fight every day for as long as it takes until you get what you want. So this makes Mars and Leo excellent fighters. I'm actually going to put Mars and Leo in the too easy category. This is all just, of course, my personal opinion. Like I said, Mars in Leo isn't in domicile or exaltation like it is in Aries or Capricorn, but I would say Mars in Leo is probably even stronger than Aries. Because again, the difference between Aries and Leo, although they have a lot in common, they're very fiery, they're very individualistic, they can be very rebellious and provocative. The difference is Leo is stable, it is fixed fire, where Aries is cardinal. So Mars and Aries may be better for getting that initial punch, that initial reaction. If you need someone to do something really bold in the moment and we just need that action in that moment, Mars and Aries, or Aries in general, is going to be your go-to. But if you need that fighter that has to be there every day, putting in the work, for the long run, that's where Mars and Leo would be really excellent, or Mars and Capricorn for that matter too. Okay, next is Mars in Libra. So this gets a bit dysfunctional again. Libra, as you can probably deduce by now, Libra is a sign that has more to do with other people. Libras are focused on relationships and, that kind of balance between me and you. And whenever you have a sign that's more detached or more focused on other people, it's just going to be more difficult to have Mars in. Because again, Mars is supposed to be about individuality. It's supposed to be about what you want, your desire. So if you put that in a sign like Libra that's focused on what everybody else wants, it becomes difficult. Someone born with Mars in Libra will not always know what they want or how to get it. They're going to be more focused on pleasing other people, or more focused on what other people want. So let's just go ahead and put Libra in the hardest category. This is also difficult because of those, or I should say the lack of reflexes, the lack of the instant response. But this comes with a strength as well that I will explain. So having Mars in detriment, or really any placement in detriment, overall it is very challenging, but there are always some kind of unique strengths that come with it. So like I talked about in the intro, Mars represents, among other things, it represents our reflexes and how we respond to critical situations, crisis situations. And if you have Mars in Libra, you're not really going to react. Libra likes to think things through, it thinks before it acts. So if you have Mars in Libra, that instant response is not going to be there. So that comes with a huge difficulty. And that's where the misunderstanding comes in. There's always misunderstanding involved with detriment placements. You're not going to respond to situations that most people would say require an instant response. They require an emotional reaction. If you have Mars in Libra, you will react by not reacting. You'll react by remaining calm and thinking things through. So the misunderstanding comes because other people will think that you either don't care or are not aware of the significance of the situation. But the strength comes, of course, because there's a huge advantage to thinking before you act in dramatic situations. So someone born with Mars in Libra will not panic. They will be the one that remains calm, and they can think before they act. It's kind of a blessing and a curse, but I happen to know a lot about that placement, so I figured I would share that. Next would be Pisces. There's Pisces. I kind of lost it for a second. Okay, so this is another sign where, well, I shouldn't say another one because Mars in Libra was in detriment, but in Pisces, Mars is not in domicile, it's not in detriment, it's not exalted, or it's not in fall, so we don't have any kind of clues to look from there. But Pisces is mutable water. It is the last sign. You know, it's all about intuition and spirituality. Everything is kind of wishy-washy, ambiguous, nuanced, complex, and constantly changing in Pisces. So I feel like you can kind of see where I'm going. Having Mars there, which is supposed to be, does really well in signs that are more black and white, you know, like Aries, Capricorn, Leo. These are all black and white. Is it yes or no? Should we do it or not do it? You know, there's no room, there's no time for nuance when it comes to Mars signs. Does that make sense? You can also look to the signs that I've ranked as the hardest: Gemini, Aquarius, Libra, maybe Cancer. These signs all deal more with nuance, and you know, they like to see they like to read between the lines, you know, and that's a great, you know, that's great. It's just not great when it comes to Mars, at least not with being innately strong. So you can see where I'm going with this. Putting Mars in Pisces is extremely confusing. Let's just drag it over. It's interesting because although it's not in detriment or fall, I'm still going to put it in the hardest category. I think Mars in Pisces is actually maybe even harder than Cancer or Libra. This is slightly off and it bothers me. There we go. But yeah, Mars in Pisces, I think, you know, rivals the others for being maybe the hardest placement of them all, you know, for Mars. Because if you have Mars in Pisces, it's almost like the difficulties that you have with Mars in Gemini plus the difficulties of Mars in Cancer. So like Mars in Gemini, not only are you not going to know what you want with Mars in Pisces, but even if you do know what you want, it's going to be constantly changing. So how do you fight for something if you don't even know what you want to fight for? You don't even know the objective, or like I said, if you do know the objective, it may change at any time. There's nothing set in stone. And then plus the difficulties of a sign like Cancer, where there's this really heavy emotion. So, you know, I think emotion when it comes to fighting and ambition can be advantageous if it motivates you, I think. But it can also be detrimental if that emotion clouds your thinking. You're too focused on your own feeling to be aware, to be present in the situation, fighting, ambitious, you know, reacting to what's around you. You know what I mean? Signs like Cancer and Pisces, I think, are more kind of introspective, more reflective. That, you know, these are all kind of passive in nature. Cancer, Libra, Pisces, Aquarius, they're all more passive in nature. So, you know, in short, putting Mars in any of these signs, especially Pisces, it's just going to be very difficult. One last thing about that, Mars and Pisces, what you will fight for will be, what's the word? You're not going to fight for things that are really tangible. You're going to fight for concepts, or I don't know, spirituality or beliefs, things like that. So there can be strength in that, but generally speaking, that's going to be a harder road to take. That doesn't mean it's not going to be a worthwhile road. You know, there could be a lot of value in that, but we're not talking about, you know, the best or worst or the most or least worthwhile. Here we're just talking about easy versus hard, and it's going to be a lot harder to fight for beliefs or spirituality than it would be to fight for yourself, like Mars and Aries would, or I don't know, or something else, the hierarchy like Mars and Capricorn. Does that make sense? Even, you know, Mars and Aquarius fighting for your community, that would be much more tangible and straightforward than fighting for your beliefs or worldview like Mars and Pisces might. Okay, next we have Sagittarius. So by now you can see some patterns. You know, this is the last fire sign we have to cover, and we've covered all the air signs. So Mars tends to not do well in air signs. I don't know why I'm talking about that. I guess that's not really relevant, but Mars tends to do very well in fire signs. Aries and Leo, you can see I've put at the top of the top. They are very strong placements. But Sagittarius is mutable fire. Mars tends to not do well in mutable signs. You know, you can see here, so far the mutable signs I've covered are Gemini, Pisces. Yeah, just those, because I haven't done Virgo yet. But you can see, you know, Gemini's neutral, Pisces is, like I said, it's maybe the hardest placement to have Mars in. Mutable signs are fickle, open-minded, adaptable. You know, there's a lot of strength in mutable signs, but when it comes to Mars, like I said, Mars does well in signs that are black and white, straightforward, consistent, or cardinal signs that are about initiation. So when you put Mars in mutable signs, you know, again, in any of the mutable signs, you're not going to know what you're fighting for. It's going to be kind of constantly changing. That's not an innately strong way to fight for something, you know. If you're going to fight for something, you should make it it should be very clear. It should be very clear cut. You know, what is your goal? How are you going to do it? There's no room for nuance. There's no room for, oh, well, I'm going to do this if this happens, or that if that happens. You know, it's not about necessarily adapting to your environment so much. It's more about, what do you want? You know, screw the environment. What do you want? How are you gonna change things according to your beliefs, your desires, not what anyone else thinks, not any of the variables, any other variables outside yourself. Does that make sense? So I just really ragged on any mutable sign when it comes to Mars, but like I said, Sagittarius is mutable fire, so we're gonna put it in the easy category. You know, there is that confidence that comes with Sagittarius of being a fire sign, that cockiness, that ambition to some extent, the drive, but Sagittarius is mutable fire. It's changeable. You know, someone with Mars and Sagittarius may have very strong goals, but then they are subject to change as well. So overall, I'd say it's still easier. You know, that fire is going to be essential. Mars and a fire sign, any of the fire signs are going to be all about the self, individuality, initiation, drive. They're all going to be kind of sexual as well. So having Mars in any of the fire signs is going to be default strong, in my opinion. But Sagittarius is mutable. It's changeable. That does kind of take it down a peg. And again, I want to stress, I'm not ranking these as best to worst or my favorite or least favorite. This is innately strong versus innately difficult. Okay, almost done here. Next, let's go to Scorpio. So Mars in Scorpio is in domicile. Mars rules Scorpio. Um, it is interesting that the other water signs, Cancer and Pisces, you can see I put at the very bottom. They're very difficult. So, and I talked about, I think with Pisces, I talked about how emotion can either help or hinder your fighting potential, I guess we could say, since that's what Mars has to do with. In other words, putting Mars in an emotional sign like the water signs, it can be advantageous if that emotion fuels your passion, if it motivates you, but it can also be difficult if it clouds your judgment, if it clouds your thinking, or if that emotion is like keeping you within yourself. Does that make sense? Like Mars works best in signs that are focused on the external world. They're maybe very physical in nature, like Aries, Capricorn, and Leo are all very physical in nature. So it gets kind of dicey putting it in a more introspective sign. But I think that's where Scorpio stands out from its other water sign. I'm forgetting the word. Its other water sign counterparts. Cancer and Pisces are much more introspective. Let's kind of slow it down. Let's focus on how we're feeling. Scorpio is focused on how it's feeling, but you can see this little dagger, this little tail that it has down here. It means that it's externally focused, unlike Virgo, which we're going to talk about last. But Scorpio is very externally focused. It's very reactive, reflexive, instinctual. These are all kind of keywords for Mars. Mars does well in signs that are like that. Scorpio is intensely emotional, but I think when it comes to Scorpio, that works in its favor for Mars. In other words, putting Mars in Scorpio, you're going to be very reactive. You're going to know when to initiate and how to initiate, and you're going to be very focused on your desires. Someone with Mars in Scorpio is going to know, generally speaking, they're going to know what they want, how they're going to get it. And Scorpio is a fixed sign too. So someone with Mars in Scorpio will be very determined. This is what I want. I'm not going to take anything less. They're going to be go-getters. And Scorpio is a very ambitious sign as well. Unlike, no offense, but unlike the other water signs, Cancer, Pisces really aren't that ambitious. Scorpio, though, very ambitious. So really, I always say Scorpio, although it is a water sign, it's very fiery. Guessing people's signs, a mistake I tend to make is I think Scorpios are Leos. If I don't know their sign and I'm just trying to guess their sun sign, to me they come across like Leos. They come across very fiery, outgoing. Scorpios are fiery. You can fight me on that. I know technically that's kind of wrong to say, but it's kind of not at the same time. You can see that Mars rulership with Scorpio. You can see that fire, that fighting ability, the reflexes, the instincts. Scorpio's kind of got it all when it comes to Mars. So definitely very strong sign. One last thing about that. Scorpio, probably more than any of the other signs that I've put at the top, Scorpio, and specifically Mars in Scorpio, is going to be the best for defensive fighting. Mars has to do with both offensive as well as defensive fighting. So someone with Mars in Scorpio, they will be definitely excellent when it comes to advancing and taking on the offensive, sort of, if that's what they want. But when it comes to defense, if you back someone who has Scorpio Mars, if you back them up in a corner, whether it be literally or figuratively speaking, they will unleash this fury, this wrath that is just indescribable. It goes beyond the capacity of the mind. Someone like myself who's more based in logic and analysis, I admire this because it's faster than thought. It's superior to mental ability. They can not only act quicker than how fast someone who's more mentally oriented may act, but also they may kind of conduct this whole kind of strategy that is, again, it's faster than thought because it's it's not done by a thought process. It's not necessarily done by analysis. It's done by instinct. It's a reflex. So Mars and Scorpio, very strong, particularly with defensive fighting. Okay, now we just have Taurus and Virgo, these two earth signs. Okay, so Mars and Taurus, technically it's in detriment. You can already kind of see where I'm going with this, but Mars and Taurus, it's in detriment, so I should put it in the hardest category, right? Maybe I should, but I've put a lot of thought into this, and I've observed people who have Mars and Taurus, and I just don't see it. I know I'm supposed to put it, it's in detriment, so it's supposed to be very difficult, at least innately difficult. But Taurus is fixed earth. It very much knows its limits. It knows its boundaries. So you have that kind of black and white thinking that I think is essential to Mars. I talked about earlier, I don't even remember what sign I was talking about, but Mars thrives with signs that are a little bit simplistic in their nature, like Aries or Leo, for example. Signs that view things as black and white, yes or no, do I want this or not? That kind of simplicity is essential for confidence and for the ability to act on the cuff, quickly, efficiently. The more you incorporate a lot of nuance and let's take every factor into account, that can be sometimes advantageous depending on the situation, but it's not efficient. That's why Mars, it has a rough time with signs like Libra or Aquarius or Pisces that are very nuanced. But Taurus isn't like that at all. Taurus is black and white. It has that simplicity, so there's a lot of strength there. You can also look to Taurus as the bull. Bulls are very peaceful animals until you provoke them, and then they, Taurus has that defensive side, almost a little bit reminiscent of Scorpio, not to the same extent, it's not nearly that intense, but I think with Taurus as a sign, specifically Mars and Taurus, these people are not going to let you trample on them. They are more than capable of defending themselves, and they even have that kind of instinctual nature, I think, too. Again, not to the level of a placement like Mars and Scorpio, but still, more so than any of these like cerebral signs like the air signs, for example. So overall, I'm going to put Mars and Taurus in the neutral category, which again, I think is so funny because it's a detriment placement. These people are supposed to be misunderstood. They're supposed to have a hard time defending themselves or knowing about their own individuality, knowing what they want. But again, I just don't see any of that with Mars and Taurus. I think it's actually a pretty balanced placement. And I'm talking innately. Even if you don't work on this part of yourself, if you have Mars and Taurus, I think it's a pretty well-rounded placement. You're not going to go picking fights with people, but you are going to be able to defend yourself and assert yourself when it's appropriate. So really, I almost want to put this in the easy category. I think Mars and Taurus is probably easier than most Mars placements, but it is in detriment, so I'm just going to put it in the neutral category to be safe, I guess. Or we could put it like in between, but then that just looks stupid. So, oh god. Yeah, that looks dumb. Let's put it in the neutral category. Okay, last we have Virgo. Now I'm kind of questioning myself. I always kind of plan these things out and I write down where I'm going to rank the signs, but I'm kind of second guessing myself a little bit. I'm going to put Mars and Taurus up here in the easy category, which it just feels wrong to me because it's a detriment placement, but I don't know. I'm curious your thoughts. If you know someone who has Mars and Taurus, or if you have Mars and Taurus yourself, do you find that it's easy to assert yourself? I guess there may be kind of a complacency that comes with that placement and a passiveness. Taurus is a passive sign. Okay, I'm kind of talking myself out of it. I'm going to put it in the neutral category. That's my final answer. I do see how it would be you may kind of lack that urge to change things. You know, Mars and Taurus would be all about stability. I think that's the potential downfall of Mars and Taurus. Because yes, you can defend yourself. That's great. That gives Mars and Taurus a lot of points. But on the other hand, when it comes to being ambitious and taking the plunge, taking a risk, making a bold move, taking the next step, all of that I think would be severely hindered by Mars and Taurus. In short, it may be a complacent and passive placement. So a lot of strengths, some weaknesses as well. I'm going to lock in my answer with neutral for sure. Okay. But the reason why I kind of second guessed that was because of Mars and Virgo. You would think, this is so wild. Okay. You would think Mars and Virgo would be rough, right? Because Virgo is analytical, it's intellectual, it's mutable, so it's changeable. I don't think people realize how changeable Virgo can be. I don't know if I'd say fickle, but they are very adaptable. They're constantly focused on their surroundings and adapting to their surroundings. Other people may think that Virgo has a lot of rules, which it definitely can have, but those rules are based on its surroundings. Those aren't things that Virgo wants necessarily. I mean, it may seem like Virgo is dictating those things or those opinions, but really those are all based on its surroundings more so than Virgo's internal desires. Does that make sense? So that's where Virgo may seem very focused on their desires and opinions, but really all that comes from the environment. They're more focused on their environments than they are themselves. Does that make sense? So Mars and Virgo, it may seem rough because this is a very nuanced sign. It can definitely get bogged down in the details. But this is kind of my own thinking. I consider Mars in joy in Virgo. Mars is in joy in the 6th house. I connect that to Mars in joy in Virgo. I know houses do not equal signs, but when it comes to the planetary joys, I do think there's a lot of weight behind the planetary joys when you apply them to the signs. Okay, let me get a little bit less technical here. So I consider Mars in joy in Virgo. To me, that means that this is the most fun placement. This is the most fun Mars placement. Why would Mars be fun in Virgo? Well, Virgo is all about breaking large things down into smaller things. It's about refinement. It's about digesting, I guess you could say. And I always quote Henry Ford. I should look up this exact quote, but basically he said that no large task is particularly difficult if you break it down into small tasks, or no large goal is particularly difficult, something along those lines. And this, I believe he was Virgo rising. I don't know if he had Mars in Virgo, but when it comes to applying Mars into Virgo, that quote is exemplary of why Mars does so well in Virgo. Because people who have Mars in Virgo naturally break down very large goals, which would seem maybe impossible or intimidating. They naturally break those down into very small tasks. And that's why it's so fun, because when your drive and your ambition is focused on constantly completing small tasks, it's a very easy approach, and it's a very easy approach to really get a lot done. You can actually conquer massive feats through this kind of detail-oriented approach, or from this small approach. I don't know the word for that. Am I making sense here at all? So basically, someone who has Mars in Virgo, they're going to be very ambitious and very productive, and they're going to constantly be getting those dopamine hits. Dopamine, in case you're not familiar, you get dopamine rushes. It's one of the happy chemicals. You get that when you win at something or when you accomplish something. So it's the kind of productivity happy chemical. It's also very sexual in nature too. Anyway, but that's why Mars and Virgo, they're going to constantly be getting those dopamine hits because they're constantly winning, because they're focused on small tasks that are somewhat easy. It's almost like how video games are designed. They're designed to give you tasks that are a little bit challenging, but not too challenging, so that you're definitely going to win at whatever it is, but it will challenge you a little bit. Does that make sense? Having Mars in Virgo is almost like living in a video game where the difficulty setting is perfect enough to have you be engaged, but easy enough that you're still going to win at everything. Does that make sense? So I know this was a little bit rambly, and I still think it's weird that Mars in Virgo would be easier than Mars in Taurus. That was why I second guessed myself with Taurus, because this just seems wrong to me. But this is what I'm going to go with. Mars in Taurus to me would seem easier because at least you have that black and white thinking that Virgo does not. Mars in Virgo could get bogged down and not see the forest for the trees or whatever, be too preoccupied in little things that maybe don't actually matter. But I don't think that's actually true. I think people with Mars and Virgo are very productive, very efficient. They're hard workers. Virgo is focused on improvement. So this escapes the... Oh my god, I'm forgetting my words here. This escapes the passive tendencies that Mars and Taurus has. The what's the word? That lack of ambition, that being kind of complacent. That's the word. Mars and Virgo does not have the complacency that Mars and Taurus does. Virgo is focused on fixing things, improving things. What's the next step? So having Mars and Virgo, you actually are very much able to take the next step, make a calculated risk, because Virgo, although it definitely doesn't seem like a risk taker, if the risk makes sense to Virgo, they will take it. So I think that's another strength that Mars has, and specifically Mars doesn't have that strength with Taurus. Mars and Taurus is more just black and white, that looks risky, so I'm not going to do it type of thing. Whereas with Virgo, they can, really kind of stick their neck outs and do some pretty crazy stuff. I'm trying not to swear in this video, but you get what I'm saying. Mars and Virgo, productive, calculated risk taker. They can get a lot of stuff done. Okay, so that's what I've got for you for me ranking the hardest and easiest Mars placements. Let me know what you think. This is all a little bit subjective. I do try to, of course, base these things on what I observe, as well as some kind of textbook astrological information as well. But let me know what you think. Would you rank any of these signs differently? I'm totally open to hearing your opinions, or did you think I nailed it? Let me know what you think in the comments. But yeah, thanks for listening. And as always, if you have any requests, I have mini series that I have not completed yet, so there's definitely a lot for me to still work on. But yeah, thanks for watching / listening, and I'll talk to you later.